Okay, so as for our learning intention and success criteria, what we're going to do is try and understand the basics of what a matrix is. Okay, you've probably never heard this before. No, it's not referring to the movie. Anyone seen the movie Matrix? Yes? It's not like that, but it is working with a lot of numbers and a lot of data. It can be used again for lots of different programs. Okay, so understanding the different types of basics of matrices. The other thing we're going to learn is how to put data into a matrix. Also identifying different types of matrices and their elements, and how to add and subtract the matrix. So really basic stuff for today, but I think you guys will get through it. So we're going to try and get through 5A, B, and C. Sounds like a lot, okay, but don't fret, we'll break it down. Right? So for part 1, like I said, we've got 2 parts of these notes. What we're going to learn about mainly is just these. Just for the first maybe couple of weeks. So just what are the parts of the matrix and different matrix arithmetic. Meaning, how do we work with the matrix? We're adding it, subtracting it, multiplying it. Okay? And then part 2 is when it gets a little bit crazier. Right? But that's the Year 12 stuff. Checklist as well is there. These are the exercises that we're going to complete for these, hopefully, next 2 weeks. But if we don't get to that, that's okay. I have a feeling you all will forget this anyway after the holidays. Yes, that's okay though. All right, cool. Let's get to it. So, let's get into this. So, a matrix is basically an array or a list of numbers that have been organized in a certain form. Now, if you look at the way this is organized, most matrices will be a rectangular shape, and your numbers will be in there. Okay. Okay, so it's a way to represent your data. That's basically what a matrix is. Representing your data in a certain specific way. Generally, most matrices will look like this. Okay, so let's say you have this data here. Okay, a bunch of numbers. You've probably seen this before, or you've probably seen this when we work with data. Okay, you'll see like a list of numbers and then what the elements are of each one. Okay, you can represent this data in a matrix. Okay, so if I have a look at this, this is what we call a row. So if you look at a matrix and you're reading it left to right, okay, you refer to it as a row. If you're looking at a matrix and you're reading it from top to bottom, it's called a column. Okay, so if I look at this matrix, on this row I've got all the Maddie, information about Maddie. So this is her height, that's her weight, her age, her pulse rate. Represented in a matrix here. This is Maddie's height, her weight, her age, her pulse rate. Okay, and this is Dave. Okay, so there's his information there in a matrix. Okay, so you can see if I'm looking at it as a row, I can see each person's information. Okay, however, if I was to read it as a column like that, I can see each person's height, each person's weight, their age, their pulse rate. So some of the questions might be, what is the average age, okay, for each person? Or what is the what is each person's, that might generally be just in this context. Depending on what information you get different types of questions asking you different things. Like, what's the total pulse rate for every person? Or how many participants were there in this test, for example? Okay? But just understand, matrix information can be represented like this. This is what you call a row. So if you read it like this, okay, these are your rows. Yes?
Will it always show this one plus this one, or like sometimes just this one?
What do you mean this one plus this one?
So like both like.
Oh, so will it show you this? So a question might say, here is some data, represent it as a matrix, which is really easy. It's basically just arrange this into this. Okay? So these are what you call your rows. Okay? And then when you're going down that way, so reading it from top to bottom, these are your columns. Okay, so just understand rows, when you're reading it like that, left to right, columns top to bottom. Okay? Right. So, if you look at a matrix, the numbers inside are what you would call the elements. So the numbers in a matrix, okay, just call the elements. So just think of all these numbers here, they're what you call the elements. Okay, so all those numbers, refer to them as elements. Like I said, matrices are made of rows. So if you read them left to right, rows, and then if you read them from top to bottom, they're called columns. Okay. And generally, when you look at a matrix, you can describe it by the number of rows and the number of columns. Okay. So what I mean by that is, if I was to describe this matrix, this would be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, an 8 by 4 matrix because it's 4 columns. So it's an 8 by 4. Okay. A matrix that looks like, for example, I've already done that there. Another example could be like, let's say your matrix looks like this. Okay, what would this be, guys? How many rows? How many columns? So it's a 3 by 3. Okay, you can have a matrix that looks like this. Okay, what would that be? 3, 3. How many rows? And then how many columns? 2.
So it's always the rows are first.
Rows is always first. Okay, so you always go rows first, and then columns. Okay, so you can describe a matrix based on the number of rows, number of columns. Okay. Okay. More things about this matrix. You can talk about. By the rows and columns. I didn't mention that. It's called an order. So if it asks you what's the order of the matrix, it's how many rows, how many columns. All right. So order. Rows and columns. Okay, that's what he's talking about. Oh, that's it. So how many rows and how many columns? Okay, so check out the number of rows and columns. So as Elio said before, it's always rows first and then columns second. Okay. Now in terms of elements, so you'll see this D23. What does that mean? Well, this matrix is called D. Okay, and according to this, let me just fix this up. What's the word? Okay. According to this, element D23 or D, actually we shouldn't read it element D23. I should call it element D23. Okay, is 19. Can anybody see the number 19 there on the matrix? Okay, right here. What do you think element D23 means? Yes. Good. So row number 2, column number 3 is the number 19. That's what that's saying. If I ask you what is D, actually I should write it like this. D 5 2. Okay, what does that mean? So that means row 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Column number 2. 1, 2. So that would be 64. So D 5 2 is the number 64. Okay, so that's what that's saying. Alright, pretty basic. Anyone lost yet? Good. Alright, let's keep going. Alright, so considering this matrix, we're just going to do some of these questions. Write down this order. Find the sum of elements in row 2. Find the sum of the columns in column 3. And write down what is an element 4, 2. Alright, so part A. Just do that here. Part A, write down the order of this matrix. So for the order, remember, you're telling me what's the number of rows, what's the number of columns. So anyone want to tell me how many rows is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it is a 5 by how many columns? 1, 2, 3. So it's a 5 by 3 matrix. Don't get scared or freaked out by the fractions. Okay, it's a 5 by 3.
You don't actually do the equation, you just put 5 by 3.
Yes. There's no equation or anything like that. You're just telling me how many rows, how many columns. Okay? Yes.
So you have to write order of M.
Yeah, so if you want, you could go M equals, but generally, if you just write the order, that's fine as well. Alright, or if you want to be as extra as Emily, you could write order of M. Yes?
How do you spell column?
COLUMN. Yeah, so the column. Alright, B. What is the sum? Right, this won't let me anymore. Okay. Okay, B, find the sum. Okay, what's that? What does the sum mean? add them all up. Okay, the sum of row number 2. So I want to add all of these numbers up. Okay, so if I was to add all those numbers up, what would it be? 0 minus 7 is negative 7 plus 1, negative 6. So that means the sum of row 2 is negative 6. Okay, part C. Okay, part C, find the sum of column number 3. Alright, so this one here. This is why I don't like this. Okay. C, find the sum of row 3. What? Okay. Row number 3, column number 3, sorry, would be this column right here. So if you have to add all of these together, when you see the word sum, this means add them all together. So negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1, minus 4 is negative 5, plus 9 equals 4, plus 1 equals 5. Okay, so that would equal 5. Just adding them all up. So when you see the word sum, it needs to add. Part D, write down the element M42. So that means what is in row 4, column 2. Okay, for part D. What is in row 4, column 2? Well, if you have a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, column 2, 1, 2, 0, right there. So M42, I would write it like this, M42 equals 0. Straightforward, easy. We want to do another example? Oh, that's pretty easy. I think it's pretty straightforward, yeah? So when it refers to the sum, make sure you add them. Remember, row is this, column is vertical. And elements are what you refer to in the numbers. Alright. I think that might be it. Okay, cool.